name is Wendy Potomsky and I'm the managing partner and owner of Retake Furniture Rentals. Retake is once again a proud supporter of the Canadian Film Festival and is working to contribute to the Canadian film and TV industry by making it an easy and sustainable place to do business. Retake provides sustainable short and long-term furniture rental options to meet production schedules and product needs. Retake also understands the importance of set design and the dynamic nature of the film and TV industry, which is why we created a company to specifically support Canadian filmmakers. Retake can assist you in setting up your production office with sustainable alternatives to keep your team working safely as we all head back to work. We use sustainable approaches to minimize product going to landfill, which means any product supplied by Retake is helping to support the circular economy. Our in-house upholstery services can tailor our product to meet your set design requirements and match your color schemes. Contact us to discuss your office furniture needs. Our goal is to help you get back to work as safely and efficiently as possible. Stay safe, everyone, and enjoy the films and shorts at this year's Canadian Film Festival.
Celebrate Canadian filmmakers on Super Channel Fuse with an exclusive homegrown event.
I'm ready.
Go.
The Canadian Film Fest, presented by Super Channel, brings this year's festival into your home for a second year as a virtual experience.
Goodbye.
Every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night until April 18th. Enjoy the premieres of indie films and shorts from critically acclaimed and up-and-coming Canadian producers and directors.
And this is where the donkey starts talking.
Immerse yourself in this inspiring and spirited event, both on air and online, with live Facebook Q&A sessions that follow the films.
Makes sense. Start it.
Experience the Canadian Film Fest, proudly presented by Super Channel.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Canadian Film Festival. Thanks for joining us for a Q&A with our filmmakers of the evening. Tonight's feature film was events transpiring before, during, and after a high school basketball game. And we're going to be joined by the filmmaking team in a moment. But to start, my name is Mark Yashodi. I'm one of the programmers of the festival.
And my name is Bern Euler. I'm the executive director of the festival. I want to welcome everybody here. And I hope you enjoyed yourselves as much as I did. Starting with Breakout, with our first film by Kevin Harford. Kevin's right here. Want to say hello to the nice people out in internet land, Kevin?
Hello, everyone.
I love that Kevin's here because he's a CFF alumnus who's been with us twice before. Sorry, Kevin, was it last year and then 2 years before that, or just last year and last year before that?
Last year and 2 years before that.
Oh man.
For I Love You More and You Two Chuckles.
Yeah, which were incredibly funny movies with just really unique takes on genres or tropes that you have seen before. And this time it was the Hunt for a Roommate kind of thing. But Kevin, you took me, you planted some seeds. I didn't hear one of them or really take it in because you're distracting me with nobody's talking. You hear everybody's voice, but you don't see them talking. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What's going on here? It's quirky. It's funny until the end, until the trust fall, which had me in stitches. How did you plan for that? Like, why are you such an evil comedic genius? That's actually what I'm asking.
Maybe I'm born with it. I originally planned it. We have a lot of filmmaking happening in Nova Scotia because of our low numbers, but we still have to be really COVID safe. And I was trying to write something where nobody would have to talk to each other on camera.
Oh, no way.
And so I saved it for about 2 parts where somebody speaks, which is at the very end, and then there's something before, which now that I'm trying to think, it's the little girl says something. And other than that, everything was just kind of recorded separately, which was very intentional. It meant less time without a mask for everyone involved.
Where did the concept for it come from? It's such a fun, the idea of sort of roommates interviewing each other, potential roommates interviewing each other is something we've seen before, but it's such an interesting spin on it. And especially this idea that sort of everyone has this character and this story behind them. And these 3 people are sort of trying to itch away at that and find each other there? Where did that come from?
It's Taylor, who plays the male lead, had done a film called Bone Cage, which just got nominated for a CSA. And his fiance in that film was Ursula Calder, who's the lead in Breakout. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know where any of the ideas come from. I just had this idea of Ursula dancing, and it all kind of spiraled out from there. I'm like, how do I get her to dance? How do I get them to dance? How do I get Taylor doing sort of a Pretty Woman? She's trying on clothes and he's giving the thumbs up or thumbs down. There's no rhyme or reason to it. That's what my brain does when I sit down to type.
It just comes out.
It just comes out.
Just like, and you didn't even take long getting this whole thing together, did you?
I thought COVID would be a great excuse to not have to do anything this year. I was like, I can take a nice long break. And then everyone else was making stuff and I was like, oh, damn it. And so I was like, I got to get something for the fall. So I wrote this. And again, I thought of you guys since I'd been in the fest twice before. I was like, oh, I wonder when the deadline is. And it was 3 weeks after we'd wrapped. So I was like, well, time to sit in the editing room.
No way. Wait,
Yeah.
so how long from when you like pen to paper until final cut?
Oh, well, pen and paper, like a couple months, but then we filmed November 8th, I think. And then your deadline was November 30th. So it was a pretty quick turnaround.
Wow.
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I'm really glad you thought of it.
No problem.
I just love to laugh. And that I had tears streaming down my face at the end. Because you led me astray, you evil genius. You made me look the other way.
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, I was just in terms of planting seeds. I had Ursula say, take a hike already twice. She says it at the beginning and then at the end. And no one picked this up while we were filming it because Ursula kept trying to change it. But she says something about her little sister saying, get out of town, man. And she's like, she has a catchphrase and it drives me nuts. And it's because her catchphrase never caught on. So she's just spent years trying to take a hike already to get going. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the very intentional things that I planted. But what were you going to say?
It's interesting that you talk about the quick turnaround time because I was going to ask about the editing. I think the editing is so great, and it's sort of the way all the pieces fit together is kind of the fun of the film. And so one of the other things I love about it is the way you're using sound, like the dog barking in the background and the drum cymbals when she's dancing. You know, there's so many little touches like that. Is that stuff that you sort of had figured out when you started, or is that stuff that you built out when you started editing?
I had done a short prior to this called Disco Apocalypse where 3 ladies were constantly breaking out into dance numbers. And I was like, dancing and sound are free to make. You don't have to film around. Like it's really easy to make something interesting and dynamic happen just through sound. So I sound edited the whole thing in pretty much every one of my movies. But it's the dog, which if you watch through the credits, you'll see the dog, which was Kumi and Taylor's foster dog that they had.
I was like, what? Like 3 seconds out.
They were fostering it while we were filming, and then they had about 10 days to decide if they wanted to keep it. So now it is their dog permanently. But I just like this idea that there's this really annoying thing happening in the background that no one's ever acknowledging or paying attention to. Which again is another one of the fun things about sound.
Yeah. We always, for some reason, we always end up talking a lot about casting and talking a lot about actors' process. And these are actors. What's interesting about this film and your other films that have shown at the festival is these are actors you've worked with a bunch. So can you talk a little bit about what that relationship is like, what that process is like? Do you guys have a shorthand? Does it make things easier or not easier? What is that like working with people you've already worked with so much?
Well, Kumi and Taylor are 2 of my best friends, and they're a couple in real life, which makes it easy to schedule them at the same time. Taylor auditioned. The only short film I ever made where I auditioned people, Taylor auditioned and he didn't get it, and then he kept sending me like updates about his reel and like his headshots, and I was like, I don't know you. Why do you keep sending me this stuff? And then eventually, when something came up, I was like, oh, I should use Taylor.
It works. That trick works.
It works. And they're very they like being directed, and I like to direct people to be as statue-like as possible. So it works out for all of us.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because they did. I mean, that is an element of your other two films that showed at the CFF too. And I think that's really hard to do, because I've seen so many people try to do that, but it doesn't work. So do you have that in mind when you're making them, like when you're doing your deadpan? That you're doing it script stage and directing wise, and how do you make sure that it's even funny?
I make sure I find it's funny, because I think deadpan is the funniest thing in the entire world. The only time I ever really had to sort of mold him was on the first one, which is called I Love You More. And I was like, no, like more still, like barely any expression, just like you're asleep, yet you're slightly awake. And they were like, oh, okay. And they kept getting smaller and smaller and quieter. And now they kind of just go in knowing that that's what they should be doing. And Ursula picks up on things very quickly, so she had no problem falling in line.
Oh, but Taylor was a pain in the ass. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, Taylor wormed his way into my heart early on, and everyone else came with him.
Well, on that note, we're just about out of time, but Kevin, thanks again for joining us. It's always great to have you. And
seriously, thanks for coming back, man. Really good to see you.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right, cool. Go make some movies.
Stick around. We'll be right back.
All right.
Hello, and welcome back to our Q&A. So to talk about our feature film now, we're joined by Ted Stenson, the director of events transpiring before, during, and after a high school basketball game. Welcome to the festival, Ted. Why don't you introduce your team to us?
Sure. So Kevin Dong is one of the producers. He's here. And then two of the star actors, Isra Abdelrahim and Maddie Vermeulen.
Hi, guys. Nice to have you with us.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful film. It's filled with a lot of dry humor, but we felt like it also demonstrates so much careful thought about the high school environment and the kind of all the dynamics that are at play and the way they connect with each other. And it just makes such funny work of the minor quibbles of high school that feel so big at that age, you know? So Ted, why don't you start by telling us about, where did this project came from? What made you want to make this film?
Well, it was definitely kind of autobiographical for me. Because I played sports in high school, and and in junior high too. And like I guess I'm the common denominator, but I was always on really bad teams, and like we were always just hopeless. And but I mean, I still loved playing, and it was still a fun experience for me, and I think for everyone. So I guess I was always interested in doing a story that kind of showed a different side of what the high school experience is like and what high school sports are like, because I feel like kind of unfailingly, like high school sports movies fall into kind of these really cliche categories, and they're either like underdog stories or they're kind of fall from grace type stories. So I wanted to try to do something that showed the kind of more mundane reality where yeah, I mean, the games aren't always that memorable, and things don't always come down to sort of the last second or the last shot, and yeah. So I mean, I thought that there was something funny about that, and also playing against the kind of conventions of like the types of kids that would be jocks or the types of kids that would be the drama kids, and yeah. So I guess it was sort of to play against the sort of cliches of the genre.
That's great.
And actually, that's one thing I really, in what you just mentioned, Ted, is the mundane, and you're really able. And this is actually not even just you; it's the whole cast and crew. You guys were really able to find the funny and the heart in the mundane, and for that reason, especially, this movie talked to me, because just like you, Ted, I've been on some ridiculous teams. I've been on some good ones later, but when I was young, yeah, they were all ridiculous and we never ever did well, but it was so much fun. Even as heartbreaking as the scores always were, the real stuff was happening on the bench and the real stuff was happening behind the bench. And you didn't even show the game, right? So you guys were really focusing on the characters, and all from the very first shot where it's just the basketball net slowly lowering. And from that moment, I was like, oh, I know what I'm in for now. This is going to be fun. I mean, I hoped it wasn't going to suck, which it didn't. But so how do you guys all, and this goes out to everybody here, how do you make sure that in the mundane, you find the funny and you find the heart?
Yeah. I mean, I can speak to like maybe being just like from the outside, I produced it. But also I think it's like, honestly, I like to think of this movie as about sort of being about like a loser. And like, if you think about it, there are a lot more losers than winners. So it's kind of like living life, it's prepared me. My whole life is preparing for this. So yeah, for us, I think it's a matter of just trying to find, like, on the production side, trying to find the sort of reality of it. Like Ted was very much into, we shot at Ted's high school, for example, and like, and it hasn't changed in like 20 years. And the actors we tried to like cast a wide net and everything. So I think, yeah, in terms of that, just trying to return to almost the realism of it was how on the production side we did that.
I want to bring Isra and Maddie into this because the drama kids were my people. I didn't play on too many sports teams, but I was definitely yelling about censorship at some point in my high school career. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What was the casting process like for you, and how'd you get involved, and what was your reactions to, meeting your characters for the first time?
Well,
yeah, Maddie, why don't we start with you?
I actually auditioned for a different character.
Okay.
And I just remember showing up in kind of a panic because it was like pouring rain outside and I was late and I was absolutely panicked. And I walked in soaking wet in rain and I just, I gave my best and I was like, I did my best and I got a completely different character than I auditioned for, which I was like, whoa. And this character was like crazy. And I'm like, yeah, I could see that. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was really happy with it. It was very different than what I expected. And it was for the better. I think it was really cool.
That's great. And Isra, what about you?
Yeah. So I guess, the funny thing is I was always kind of a high school theater kid, and majority of the kids in my drama class actually did end up auditioning for this production, because even though it was like a micro budget film in Calgary about Calgary, it was still a pretty big deal for a majority of high school theater kids in the city, I think. And I think drawing from that experience definitely helped quite a bit. I know being in high school theater, it seems like in the moment and during showtime and during production, everything is such a huge deal. But in the greater context of like the world, not even the school, nobody really cares what the theater kids are doing. At anything, even like Remembrance Day assemblies, it's everyone else does their artistic sort of showcase that makes sense, and then it's theater kids making an embarrassment of themselves doing like a shadow play. So I think sort of drawing from that experience of feeling like everything was a bigger deal than it was in high school, I was really able to sort of inform my character and find the humor and sort of the very not embellished realities of what it's like to be a high school theater kid.
Yeah, and going off of that, this is a question for Kevin and Ted a little bit more. Can you guys talk a little bit more about the casting process? Because another one of the things that we loved so much about this was the high school students actually seemed like high school students instead of 30-year-olds like they do in so many other movies,
It was
right? So
very, very well cast.
yeah, I mean that's I the cast is the charm of the film. So can you guys talk about what the casting process was like? Kevin, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. So for casting, we this isn't like we had to use Andrew Fung was on since the beginning, so we had to go through like ACTRA and everything. But in Calgary, ACTRA, like there are not very many like child actors in Calgary, so we sort of went through his networks and sort of put out our casting call through. Shout out to like Loose Moose Theater Company or Loose Moose Improv Company in Calgary. Put out calls to like all those sort of different things. We went to some theater festivals and like tried to spread our call out there. I want to say props to Sue Bristow, our casting director, for also like pulling in her networks of young actors and things as well. And yeah, we just tried to spread it all around the city as much as we could. I don't know if Ted wants to speak to the actual casting process because that was really fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm always curious what auditions are like. So what was it that you were looking for, and how did you, what was your sort of logical process for picking out people that you thought would work for the film?
Yeah, it was really interesting, and honestly, it was one of my favorite parts of the film because I mean, I'd never, been part of a casting process that was so big. And I think for a movie of our scale, it was a bit unusual to have so many characters. And there was also, the challenge that, there isn't a huge pool in Calgary of high school aged, actors that have agents. So yeah, we wanted to really put out the call as wide as we could and get it to as many, anybody who's interested really. And we ended up with a lot of people that had never been on a film before. And yeah, I mean, the casting process was really fascinating for me too, because we had a casting agent, Sue Bristow, who was really helpful. And I feel like I actually learned a lot about just directing from the casting process. So it was really invaluable for me because we saw so many people, and I got a lot of confidence from that process in terms of how to just subtly try to shift people and see if they were open to that, and see how people could respond, because it's not always a clear-cut thing where you say like, oh, you need to be more sad or more happy. Sometimes like I feel like I learned a lot about how to, I guess, just direct. And I suppose that was one of the main things that we looked for, was just like, can people sort of adjust and or are they totally set in their ways. But I mean, it was exciting because I feel like we had a lot of people in, like, ultimately there wasn't really a single person that we at the beginning said like, this person has to be this character, and they wound up being that character. I think that it was much more because in the script it really wasn't like characters had to look a certain way. There wasn't really any kind of sort of physical specification, like this person has to be tall or whatever. So I mean, anyone who was the right age could kind of fit in for any part almost. So yeah, I don't know, it was really exciting, and we got to see a lot of people who were even auditioning for the first time. So yeah, and a lot of them ended up being in the film, so it was great. Like yeah, I feel like for me, I probably learned the most through that process, and it was really helpful, especially by the time we ended up shooting. It had given me a lot more confidence in how to sort of approach actors and work with actors.
That's great. Isra and Maddie, Ted, we're going to talk to you about this in a sec, but the film is structured in a very specific way, and especially in terms of how the scenes are presented, you wouldn't necessarily call them long takes, but they're static shots, and there's a healthy amount of dialogue there, and there's not a lot of cutting within the scenes. So for you guys as actors, was that a challenge at all to do that, or did it come naturally? Was it more like a play?
That was actually wonderful. I thought that was a lot better because you don't lose your rhythm, and it really does pick up the energy that's in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked that a lot.
Okay. And Isra, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think there were both pros and cons. Like similar to Maddie, it felt like the closest thing to what I had already experienced, which was theater in high school. But it also sort of, I don't know, maybe this is just my own anxiety as an actor, but when there is a long static shot and you are the focal point of the shot, you sort of get into your head about the fact that your entire body and everything that you're doing is being picked up in this frame. And I think ultimately it did sort of play off well, I guess, because my character was naturally just very anxious, so I could easily use that.
And especially with your sit-in, you know, you really are the focus of that. It's just you.
Yeah. But I also think it was really nice in the sense that there was no interruption, and so I don't know, Maddie, you felt this too, but we were able to feed off each other's chemistry really well because we were just allowed to play and improvise and really experiment as
Be in it. Yeah.
Oh, so how much of it was scripted versus improvised? And Ted, how much did you tell them even beforehand they could, or was that just a generic thing?
I mean, I think it ended up being pretty close to the script, but we did end up doing, because you know, I had always kind of from the very beginning, I'd written it with the idea of doing these static, uncut takes. So, you know, kind of masters for every scene. So, and, you know, we shot it like that. So, but occasionally, you know, we would switch lines around on the fly and, you know, cut lines out. So there was a lot of that happening, and, you know, and then some improvising. You know, ultimately I feel like I painted myself into a bit of a corner by having such a sort of strict, like, you know, visual style. And, you know,
but it works really well for the film. You know, that's one of the things we loved about it so much is the formalism of it. And it's almost like, especially with the play, it's almost like you're watching a play within a play, and seeing everything in kind of this like stage-like fashion. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about sort of, you know, even though you might have felt later on that it was maybe a bit too restrictive when you were going into it, what was your thinking behind, you know, wanting to do it that way in terms of the visual treatment of the whole thing?
Yeah, I think the idea really, because it, you know, from the beginning, I always had that idea that it would be, you know, all these static kind of long takes that would be uncut, and there'd be no camera movement, no zooming or anything, and really pretty much no intercutting. You know, I thought that would be the best way to sort of present it in a banal fashion, you know, like these mundane events, and they're, you know, they're not embellished by the camera, like, you know, a very sort of like neutral, objective perspective for the camera. I think, you know, and in a way it was actually like a great, for the production. I mean, we shot really quickly. It was an economical way to shoot, but I mean, in a way, like I painted myself in a corner because, you know, we ended up having more time to shoot really. And I should have taken more advantage of that because, you know, I think when we got into the editing and realized, like, you know, of course, especially as a novice, I think I just didn't realize, like, wow, you know, it's good to have options at the end of the day. And even if you think like, oh, this is going to be banal but funny, and then sometimes, you know, you need something else to achieve that effect. So it was interesting. But I mean, it's just, I had always had that idea, and the sort of inspirations for the film were very much stylized like that. So I mean, I think in the end it was a bit of an interesting mix in terms of this like visual style, which is pretty austere, and then the writing, which is, you know, more kind of comedic. And I think that was, you know, it's a tricky thing to combine. You know, if I had shot more stuff, I think it could have maybe brought those worlds together a little bit more smoothly. But
But I think, but you know, I think that's what's so unique about it. That's why it kind of stuck with us so well. This is a good chance to bring in this question from Paul, though, asking more about the logistics. Kevin, you mentioned that, you know, you guys shot this in Ted's high school. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of how long did you guys shoot for? What was it like? You know, you guys have a relatively big cast, even though they're not all in the same place at the same time. What was it like sort of scheduling and wrangling everyone? Can you talk a little bit more about what the production process was like?
Yeah, for sure. So we shot we planned for 15 days. So this is like a micro budget shoot. So
That's not a bad time. That's good.
That's
pretty quick. Like we thought it would be pretty tough, but like Ted said, it actually like due to actually some really, really good planning by Guillaume Carlier, our DOP, and Ted, like who basically storyboarded everything. So we were able to like know exactly what we wanted to get. But yeah, that's a huge part of it. So like we had a really good sort of like storyboard a plan to work for them. And in terms of scheduling things too, we sort of shot all the kids at once, like we started with, I think, the theater kids, and then sort of went to some of the adults, and then ended with like the basketball scenes, due to like some availability with Andrew and everything. But yeah, we ended up having like 2 days off, which is crazy, I think like we shot so quickly that we wrapped 2 days early, and then that, I don't know, maybe that shows like either really good planning on my behalf or really bad planning. I'm not sure. But yeah, I hope that answers. Like, I'm not sure what else.
Yeah, no, that's great. We have another question here from Paul, asking more about the dialogue. You know, this is another one of the things that I wanted to mention, where, you know, they sound like high school students as well. You know, we see so many movies and so many TV shows where high school students just sound totally stupid and kind of, you know, they don't really sound that realistic. So Ted, you know, if you have anything to say about the dialogue specifically and the writing process, what was that like? Did that come naturally, or was that something that was harder to find?
Well, one of the things that I always, or, you know, one of the first things that I thought of when I was working on this is like when I was in high school, it just, I don't know, maybe it was just kind of the years I was there, but like there was actually a lot of crossover in terms of like the basketball team and the theater kids. So I was involved in theater, and there was another guy that was he was a, you know, really good athlete, was always like on every sports team, but he also was really serious about theater, and he ended up becoming he's a professional actor now. And, you know, so I mean, there was like the jocks were not so kind of clear cut, like all we care about is sports. It was like our team was really nerdy. And so, you know, I remember like for whatever reason, like Camus, like Stranger was, you know, a locker room topic that would come up. So I don't know, that was just, you know, I wanted to, yeah, again, sort of break down some of the conventions of like what jocks would talk about. And I don't know, I mean, that was something that, you know, was sort of true to my own experience. So
you know what? Sorry, Ted, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one thing I really liked about your depictions of your characters was exactly what you were saying. Because when I was in high school, I was in lots of theater stuff, but lots of my friends were, you know, jocks or whatever you want to call them, and it was like the movies were trying to tell me who I should be. But I'm like, no, just whatever. They're my friends. They're interesting, but I like this stuff. This is what I am doing, and that seems to be like a more natural way to portray the way you did it was a more natural way to portray your characters, and for that reason they were more real to me, and that's why I connected with them. So yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there, you know, there certainly, you know, is that. And I mean, again, it may have been somewhat you know, just something that, you know, at the time I was at the school, that's kind of what the social vibe was like. But yeah, there was a lot of crossover between, you know, these sort of social groups. And so I wanted to portray, I think in a way it was like I wanted everything to be like really mediocre. Like this school is so mediocre that there aren't even like these you know, like extreme cliques or whatever. It's like everyone's just kind of in this same like you know middle ground that
Yeah.
they're not, no one's doing anything too, sensational, but
We have a question here from Marie, and I think it's a good one to end on because we're almost out of time. Asking about sort of the biggest challenges. So maybe we can go through everyone, and you can tell us about, what the most difficult day on set was, or a particular scene or anything. Maybe we can start with Isra and Maddie, and then talk to Ted and Kevin. Do either one of you have a memory of a particularly difficult scene or day during the shoot? Something that might have been particularly challenging. If anyone else has an answer first, you can go first. Kevin, you're smiling.
I'm smiling because I'm like, I thought we had a pretty good time. No,
yeah, I mean, you guys also sound like you had a pretty smooth shoot.
The hardest bit was a night shoot. Like we had a night shoot.
Yeah.
And the way it ended up, I think Maddie was there for like
all night. Yeah, it was like long.
13 hours more than anyone else. Because we just scheduling, we had to shoot our night scene last, which is insane to think about. So, but it turned out really well. So
it was fun though, staying up all night. It was cool.
At school too, so it sort of feels like I don't know.
It's like a wake-a-thon or whatever.
Yeah.
Isra, do you have anything?
I mean, I know for me, those like clear tape markings definitely killed me. It was actually really funny, like in theater, at least in high school theater, because really the requirements are you show up and you emote. We had these gigantic, unnatural neon like tape squares for like blocking. It was awful. You could like totally tell that everything was pre-scripted. But for film, obviously everything is a bit more natural, nuanced, and if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a movie, you maybe don't want to do that. But yeah, those clear tape markings were pretty awful. I think really though, in terms of acting for me, I always just sort of at that age, like it was a couple of years ago, I always knew that film acting was more natural, but because it was, or the dialogue itself was so natural, I didn't really have any of my theatrical instincts to channel into what I knew. So it was almost, even though it felt like acting natural should have been easier, I know for me that was a bit of a weird and difficult transition to make because I hadn't had any formal training or exposure to film acting before. But
that's a really interesting point. It is a different kind of acting. Ted, why don't we finish off with you? As a director, as a writer for this thing, what was, and you were talking about some of the things you're thinking about in retrospect on the film, but overall, what do you think was sort of maybe the most difficult part of it?
Yeah, I think definitely the post-production phase was the toughest for me because really the shooting was like a dream. I mean, I was at my old high school. It was like literally like a dream, like I was like the king of my high school. Like I could do anything I wanted in this weird empty building. But yeah, the shoot went really quickly and smoothly. And, I think like I felt really happy with what we got. But I think, in my inexperience, like, getting to post-production and just, it's like we put all the pieces together and sometimes they don't fit together as you imagine they would. And I think for me, that was a big learning experience, and just in terms of giving yourself options, for ways to adjust. And like, we definitely like cut it pretty close to the bone in terms of what we shot. And, I think that if you have the luxury to, shoot a little more and, experiment a little more, if you have the time, like it's definitely worth it. Cause I think in the end, sometimes those little, throwaways can really help you. So yeah, I think it,
the genre scenes, I think like half of them are like, oh, we thought we should get those on the day. And like, I love they're my favorite part of the movie. Like, so
yeah. I wish I had so much more B-roll, because in a way that's what the movie is about, is sort of like kind of nothing happening. And oddly, I didn't get very much B-roll of, like I wish I just had more stuff of like kids watching the game and, just time passing. And, those were weirdly things that in the end I hadn't shot. So
my favorite character in the film was the lady that is just knitting, and that to me felt, for some reason, it just felt so real. somehow that
Her
you know,
snacks.
yeah, that was just such a great little touch. And the film is filled with like little ideas like that on the periphery, you know. So unfortunately, that brings us to time. I want to thank you guys for bringing the film to the festival. It's really fun. It's so great. And I can't wait to see what else everyone here is going to do in the future. We want to thank everyone online for tuning in. The festival is almost over. Our closing night film plays tomorrow. So join us and we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye.